I thought the person introduced by the CEO would be a well-brought-up lady, but to think that the whole family is this low class. On the day of my precious granddaughter's matchmaking, the father of her prospective partner insulted us. The prospective partner seemed like an earnest young man and tried to reprimand his father for his behavior. But the father didn't care and sneered. Isn't it the truth? Please stop speaking ill of my grandfather. At that moment, my usually quiet granddaughter retorted at the prospective partner's father. However, infuriated by being talked back to, the father threw the contents of his cup at my granddaughter. "You insolent girl, who do you think you're talking to?" Fortunately, the contents were cold, so my granddaughter wasn't burned, but her hair was dripping wet. "Go home, you parentless pensioners." Understood, we declined this matchmaking. I could no longer tolerate this man. With a cold tone, I took my granddaughter and left the meeting. I am Mike Taylor, 70 years old. I worked vigorously as the CEO of a major manufacturer. But I stepped down 10 years ago to make way for my talented second son and now serve as the chairman, stepping back from day-to-day operations to oversee the company. Having been busy all these years, I now live peacefully with my wife and granddaughter, Nancy. Nancy is the daughter of my eldest son and his wife. However, my eldest son and his wife passed away in an accident when Nancy was very young. That day was their wedding anniversary, and my wife and I were taking care of Nancy. My eldest son and his wife went out for a drive, but a car ran a red light and hit them from behind, killing them. Nancy might not have many memories of her father and mother since she was so young. But from that day, my wife and I decided to shower Nancy with all the love we had for our sons and raise her with great care. Now, Nancy is an adult and works admirably. I might be a doting grandfather, but I believe Nancy has grown into a wonderful adult who is gentle-hearted and firm in her beliefs despite being quiet. Actually, since I am the chairman, she could have joined a major company without job hunting. But after graduating from college, she chose to find a job at another company on her own. Nancy, who dislikes standing out, seems to hide the fact that she is the granddaughter of a major company's chairman. With her common surname, it appears no one has discovered her true identity yet. To avoid inconveniencing Nancy, I also lead a modest life and keep my status private as much as possible. The days passed peacefully, and we spent very comforting times. One day, my second son came over, saying he had something to discuss, and he joined us for dinner. "Nancy, how old will you be this year?" After dinner, while my wife was cleaning up, my second son started talking to Nancy. "I'm 25, Uncle. Why do you ask so suddenly?" Nancy looked puzzled, staring at my second son. Seeing Nancy's expression made me feel nostalgic. "I see. You're already that age. Time sure flies." "Actually, there's a very talented employee at my company I want to introduce to you. It's sort of a matchmaking thing. What do you think?" Nancy let out a small "what?" in surprise at his suggestion. I was a bit surprised too at first, but then I understood. While it saddens me to think of Nancy, whom I've raised like a daughter, getting married, she's also a grown woman now. It might be good for her to meet him at least once. I nodded slightly and looked at my second son and Nancy. "Indeed, if it's someone you're recommending, I feel assured." "Nancy, you don't have to if you don't want to, but it could be a good opportunity, don't you think?" "Well, it feels a bit early, but I guess I can't keep saying that forever. If it's Uncle's suggestion, I might as well meet him." Nancy seemed a little hesitant at first, but trusting my second son's recommendation, she answered positively. "Thank you, Nancy. He's the son of our company's sales manager. He's an exceptionally talented employee and a really good person. Of course, if you don't think it works out after talking to him, feel free to say so." "Okay, Uncle, thanks for understanding," my second son said with a gentle smile, and Nancy seemed a bit more at ease. About the day of the meeting, it seems he'll be coming with his father, the manager. I could accompany you, but I think Dad would be better. Yes, Grandpa raised me like his own daughter. I'd like him to come as my parent substitute. Nancy, of course. Her words brought tears to my eyes. Knowing that she understood how much I cherished her made me very happy. At the same time, I decided to properly judge if this man could make Nancy happy. Oh, Uncle, I have one request. What is it? Nancy looked directly at my second son and said, I don't want to reveal at first that Grandpa is the chairman and that I'm his granddaughter. I dislike people who judge based on titles. Is that okay? It was such a Nancy-like statement. I agreed because I didn't want someone who chose her just for being the chairman's granddaughter. Of course, I understand. We'll go with that plan. I'll inform you about the details later. Thanks, Mom. Thanks for the meal. I'm heading home. Saying that, my second son left. After he was gone, Nancy murmured to herself, almost like a soliloquy. I'm matchmaking, right? I'm at an age where I need to think about marriage too. Time flies. Really? Well, if the guy turns out to be a jerk, Grandpa will knock him out for you. I said, jokingly, while laughing, and Nancy laughed too. Thank you. Having you around makes me feel secure. I hope he's someone who will cherish you and Grandma too. Hearing Nancy's words, I genuinely thought she had grown into a fine person. I just hope her prospective partner is kind and someone I can trust her with. The following week, on the day of the matchmaking, Nancy and I dressed modestly to avoid revealing that we were the chairman and his granddaughter, and headed to the designated place. The meeting place was an old, well-established restaurant. It was a place I had used many times for business dinners when I was the CEO. The proprietress hadn't changed and smiled when she saw my face. She greeted me with the same warm smile as before, giving a slight nod. Oh, Mr. Taylor, now it's Chairman Taylor, isn't it? It's been a while. Long time no see today. Please keep it a secret that I'm the chairman. When I said that, the proprietress quickly put her head down with a surprised look. My apologies then, Mr. Taylor. Let me show you the way. She then led us to the room where the prospective partner was waiting. In the room, 2 men were already seated. The intelligent-looking young man in the center was likely the partner, and the man in his 50s next to him was probably his father. However, I felt uneasy when I looked at the father. He seemed rather displeased. Excuse us, we look forward to today. When I smiled and entered the room, the young man quickly stood up and gave a refreshing smile. Thank you for taking the time today. My name is Charles Wilson. Pleased to meet you, please. Have a seat here. The young man, Charles, who gave a glance slightly and looked straight at us, was apparently the partner. His smile was refreshing, and my first impression of him was very good. As I moved to sit in the seat Charles had shown us, I felt an unpleasant, scrutinizing gaze. It seemed that Charles's father was looking us up and down, assessing both Nancy and me. The sullen expression I saw when I entered the room made me feel a strong dislike for this man. Moreover, despite his son standing and greeting us, the father did not bother to stand or speak, just staring at us. However, this meeting was mainly about Nancy and Charles. Not wanting to create a bad atmosphere, I smiled at Charles and his father and quietly took a seat. As soon as we sat down, the proprietress came in, placed the drinks for the toast, and quietly left. Charles took a light breath and, with the same refreshing smile, addressed us. Once again, thank you for taking the time today. I asked the CEO for a favor to arrange this opportunity. This is my father, Richard, father. Please greet them. Charles prompted his father, who sat with a sullen expression, to greet us. Nice to meet you, Richard said reluctantly, with a clearly unwilling expression. It seemed he didn't have a good impression of us and remained rude. I'm sorry about my father. Charles apologized, lowering his eyebrows in a sorry expression. It seemed Charles, unlike Richard, had a sincere personality. "It's okay, Nancy. Let's introduce ourselves." I gave Nancy a gentle pat on the back to encourage her. Nancy stood up straight, as usual, and greeted them with a clear, dignified voice. "I'm Nancy Taylor. This is my first time doing something like this. I apologize if I make any mistakes. Thank you for having us today. This is my grandfather." Nancy gestured toward me, and I gave a slight nod. "My parents passed away when I was young. My grandparents have raised me in their place." When Nancy finished speaking, Richard frowned. "Oh, and what do you do for work?" he asked rudely with a suspicious look. "I've heard he's the sales manager at my company, but he joined after I retired, so I don't know much about him. It's surprising that someone as well-mannered as his son has such an arrogant father." Suppressing my irritation, I calmly replied, "I'm retired now and living a quiet life." As soon as I finished speaking, Richard let out a loud sigh. "Living on a pension, him?" I was about to respond angrily, but Richard continued. "I thought the person introduced by the CEO would be an outstanding lady, but to think the whole family is this low class." Richard sneered, leaning back and propping his elbow on the table arrogantly. "Father, how can you say such a thing? It's rude. I am truly sorry." Charles hurriedly tried to stop his father and apologized to us, but his father showed no sign of listening to his son's words. "Because it's the truth, isn't it?" I glanced at Nancy, who had her head down and her lips tightly shut. Kind-hearted Nancy was probably staying quiet out of respect for my second son's position. However, she must have felt the same frustration as I did. Ignoring our expressions, Richard continued talking. "My son Charles is very talented, unlike you. When he was young, he was called a prodigy in our area. When he attended prep school, he ranked first nationwide in mock exams. He entered college as the top student." Richard's tone grew more boastful as he spoke. "Do you know why he's so talented? Because we invested time and money in raising him. Even now, he's one of the top young salesmen in our company, and there's no doubt he'll get promoted." Having said all this in one breath, Richard paused. Charles, visibly angry, tried to stop his father, but Richard ignored him and continued to talk, grinning at us condescendingly. "But you all, without parents, your daughter surely doesn't have any decent upbringing. She's not a match for my son." Hearing those words, I clenched my fist tightly. "Isn't that going too far?" Suppressing my urge to yell, I glanced at Nancy again. She was still looking down, her expression darker than before. There was no way I could stay silent seeing Nancy like this. I glared at Richard and responded in a low voice, "Hey, that's incredibly rude." However, Richard, upon hearing my voice, only leaned in with a smirk. "I'm just stating the truth, and besides, at your age, you show up to a matchmaking in such shabby clothes." Sure, Nancy and I had chosen modest clothes for today, but they weren't that bad. Perhaps to someone like Richard, flaunting a suit with an obvious brand logo, we looked shabby. With a sneering smile, it seemed his target had now shifted to me. "Well, living on a pension must mean you don't have much money." Richard laughed mockingly at me. His comments were so insulting that I considered revealing my status as his company's chairman. Just then, I glanced at Nancy and saw her, who had been silent until now, slam her hand on the table and stand up. "Regardless of what you think of me, stop talking about my grandfather that way." Nancy, who usually never raises her voice, had reached her limit and spoke out firmly. "In all the years we've lived together, I've never seen Nancy this angry. It must have truly enraged her. Realizing how much she cares about me made me proud of her." However, Richard was the one who got angry at Nancy's words. Moments ago, he was happily insulting us, but being talked back to by Nancy enraged him. He threw the contents of his teacup at her. "You insolent girl, who do you think you're talking to?" Fortunately, the tea was cold, so Nancy didn't get burned, but it soaked her hair, and drops were dripping down. I noticed it had also gotten on her blouse and skirt. Stunned, I couldn't say anything in return. Richard, looking satisfied, sneered at Nancy, who was now drenched. "Go home, you lowlifes with no parents and living on a pension." He snorted and sat back down. Charles, seeing this, shouted at his father in a near scream. "What have you done, father? That's incredibly rude. Apologize to them right now." Seeing Charles's reaction didn't faze Richard, he finished Charles's tea and slammed the cup on the table, not hiding his irritation. "She should be the one apologizing first for being rude to me. I've always told you to aim for the CEO's daughter. What are you doing wasting time with these lowlifes?" Seeing that Richard was adamant about not apologizing, Charles, on the verge of tears, repeatedly apologized to us. "I am so sorry. My father's behavior is inexcusable. Nancy, are you hurt?" Charles kept apologizing to us. Although I understood that Charles wasn't to blame, I couldn't forgive Richard's attitude. More than anything, it was painful to see Nancy's saddened expression caused by Richard's words. "We would like to decline this matchmaking, Nancy. Let's go." "Excuse me, decline? That's my line. Get out of here." Ignoring Richard's insults, I guided Nancy out of the room. The proprietress was shocked to see Nancy drenched. She quickly brought a towel and gently dried Nancy's hair. "I'll arrange a car right away." The proprietress efficiently arranged a car, and it arrived in front of the restaurant shortly. Nancy, likely saddened by the mention of her parents, remained silent. Neither of us spoke a word as we left. As we were about to get into the car, we heard hurried footsteps from inside. "Mr. Taylor, I am so sorry." It was Charles and Richard, rushing towards us from inside. Charles had put his head down to express his deepest apology, just as he had before. To our surprise, Richard, looking flustered, also apologized following Charles. "I deeply apologize for my earlier behavior." What in the world was going on? As we stood there, surprised, Charles began to explain. "When the matchmaking was called off, I called the CEO who arranged it. Then I found out that Nancy is the CEO's niece, and her grandfather is the chairman. I didn't realize you were the chairman. My deepest apologies." So my second son had mentioned us in his call. Even so, Richard's sudden change in attitude was astonishing. "Is there still something you'd like to say to these so-called lowlifes living on a pension?" I asked sarcastically, smiling at Richard. Richard turned pale and his eyes darted around, desperately searching for words to apologize. "Isn't lowlife a term more fitting for someone like you who can insult others without a second thought?" I said to Richard in a low voice. Richard turned pale, sweat dripping from his forehead. As he stood there speechless, I took a step closer and spoke again. "I'll make sure to tell the CEO to thoroughly review your position." Upon hearing this, Richard crouched down, putting his head to the ground in a deep apology. "I am terribly sorry. I had no idea she was the chairman's granddaughter." He repeated his apologies in a thin voice. When I said nothing, Richard looked up and continued, seemingly desperate. "If she is the chairman's granddaughter, we would be honored to proceed with the matchmaking." His attitude was so appalling that I could only sigh. This was exactly the kind of person Nancy despised, someone who judged others solely based on their titles. "I already rejected the matchmaking. You also told us to leave. What are you talking about now?" All I could do was relay this in a sighing tone, utterly exasperated. Ignoring Richard, who hung his head at my words, Nancy and I turned to get into the car, but Charles called out to us, "Nancy, Chairman Taylor, please wait." Nancy and I stopped and turned around to see Charles expressing his apology once again. "Please allow us to continue the matchmaking." "No, we've already declined. I apologize, but your father's behavior was intolerable." Just as I said this, Charles looked up and met my eyes directly. Please, if you'll allow us to continue, I'll sever ties with my father. That's how much I care for Nancy. Nancy gasped beside me, and I was equally surprised, glancing at Charles. Charles began to speak quietly. The truth is, my father has always pressured me to have a matchmaking with the CEO's daughter. The CEO, probably worn down by my father's persistence, asked me, "Would you like to meet my daughter for a matchmaking?" Charles glanced at Nancy with a slightly embarrassed look. Nancy, who had been looking down, was now listening intently to Charles's confession. I told the CEO that I already have someone I care about. Taking a deep breath, Charles continued. Actually, when I visited a client, I saw Nancy working there and fell in love at first sight. When I told the CEO about a woman named Nancy Taylor at our client, he set up this matchmaking. I see. So this meeting happened without you knowing that we are the chairman and his granddaughter. That's right, please. Give me another chance. Charles sincerely apologized once again. His feelings for Nancy seemed genuine. At this point, it wasn't my place to decide. I looked at Nancy and she was gazing at Charles. I also want to know more about you, Charles, she said shyly. Seeing these two young people, I couldn't help but smile. All right, but for today we'll be leaving. Nancy needs to change. I will arrange another meeting for us to talk properly. I paused and glanced at Richard. He was still looking down, his face pale. However, the condition is that your father does not interfere in any way from now on. Of course, I'll cut ties with him today. Thank you so much. As we were talking amicably, Richard, who had been kneeling and hanging his head, looked up. Cut ties, you? Charles looked down at Richard and spoke coldly. I've always had doubts about your habit of belittling others. This incident made me realize just how wrong you are. I don't need you in my life anymore. I was a bit impressed by Charles's firm declaration. If he could stand up like this, I might be able to trust him with Nancy. Feeling this way, I told Charles that I would be in touch and finally got into the car with Nancy to head home. The next day, I went to the company for the first time in a while. My destination was the HR manager's office. I also called in my second son, the CEO, and the three of us discussed what had happened the previous day. Review all internal personnel affairs thoroughly. This is an order from the chairman. The HR manager quickly took action. As they conducted internal interviews and investigations, Richard's bad attitude came to light. It turned out that while he was obsequious to higher-ups like my son and the HR manager, he was arrogant and harassing toward his subordinates. There were even instances of what could be considered workplace bullying, so his punishment was decided swiftly. He was demoted to a regular employee and transferred to a remote location. When the HR manager called in Richard to inform him of his punishment, Richard, his pride wounded, retorted, I won't work as a regular employee. I'll quit this company. He then resigned immediately. Well, it was probably better for our company as we didn't want any trouble at the new location. After the subsequent matchmaking, Nancy and Charles started dating successfully. Seeing Nancy happily talk about Charles at home made me feel very content. Today, Charles was coming over for dinner. Considerate and sincere, Charles was truly a good young man, far removed from his father's behavior. Actually, I wanted to talk about my parents. Charles began as we finished our meal. After my father quit his job, my mother finally expressed her dissatisfaction with his behavior, and they decided to get a divorce. I see, that must have been tough for you, Charles. No, my mother has since resumed her old hobby of playing tennis and seems quite lively now. I have no plans to see my father anymore. I really apologize for that day. Charles apologized again. Charles, don't worry about it. I was really happy you shared your feelings that day. Nancy smiled at Charles as she said this. They seem to be nurturing their relationship calmly, going out together and sometimes having meals at our home, building a strong and healthy relationship. Seeing the two of them together, I reaffirmed my decision to continue warmly watching over Nancy's romantic journey.